It takes a village to raise a child, as the old saying goes. Today, we're going to be diving into an animated film that not only showcases that phrase, but also showcases that it can only take one individual to impact a village. So without further ado, we're going to dive in and talk about a beautiful film called The Wild Robot.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. You're a cheap, lousy, dirty, stinking mug! And I'm glad what I've done to you!
No. Try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try. Is that a challenge?
Temper. I wouldn't dream of challenging you.
Incident report. At 0300 hours, a number of Universal Dynamics robots were lost in a typhoon. Chance of recovery is unlikely.
Do you need assistance? Aggression detected. I see your problem. Processing language.
You need to learn how things work on this island.
Hello.
Goslings imprint on the first thing they see.
Which would be you?
You're his mother now.
I do not have the programming.
No one does. He needs to swim and fly.
Swimming's easy. I can teach him the way my mom taught me.
Swim!
He's a runt. His chances aren't super good.
I will protect him.
He's gotta leave this island by fall.
Right, Bill?
It is more dangerous for him than anyone else. But he has a chance. If where his wings end, his heart can pay the balance.
You are not easy to find. You are defective. I feel fine. You should not feel anything at all.
Mom? No!
Sometimes, to survive, we must become more than we were programmed to be. I will protect all of you.
You are ordered to return home.
I am already home. And I am a wild robot.
I came prepared to talk about animation today, clearly. Got one of my favorite animated shows. While it's not a film, I'm fairly certain that there have been films made of it. This is Dragon Ball Z, one of my all-time favorite shows. It's very cinematic, so I find it to be relatively fitting in terms of the fact that we're talking about animation. This movie, The Wild Robot, has been out for a minute. And I want to begin by talking about its impact on the box office, which is where we usually start on this show. First Watch, which is a show within the Gaffer channel. So let's talk about where it sits currently. The domestic box office, it's currently made $83.7 million. Internationally, it's made $64.7 million, which comes to a total worldwide of $148.45 million. To put that into perspective, the budget for this movie was $78 million. So they're doing well, for sure. Right now, the box office currently sits as a whole for this year, for 2024, at $6.44 billion. The total amount that the box office made in 2023 was $8.96 billion. So currently, we're at about 72% of what we saw in 2023. So the ultimate question becomes, will we hit what we hit in 2023, or will we fall short? Hopefully, we'll hit what we hit in 2023. There's still quite a few movies waiting to come out. We've got Moana 2. I've talked about that in previous segments. We've got Wicked. I think both of those are going to do really well. So we'll see where the box office goes by the end of the year. I'll obviously have an update on that. But right now, we're at 72% of the total we saw in 2023. Now let's talk about the production company of this movie, The Wild Robot. This movie is done by DreamWorks Animation, I believe, but don't hold me to it. I believe this is their 30th anniversary. Fairly certain I saw that on social media the other day. I want to go through their top films, and it's probably going to come as no surprise to anybody that is a fan of DreamWorks Animation. The top 3 films from DreamWorks Animation in terms of the best opening weekend. At number 3, we have Shrek Forever After at $70.8 million, its opening weekend. We have at number 2, Shrek 2, which made $108 million, its opening weekend. And number 1, we have Shrek the Third, which made $121.6 million, its opening weekend. How does The Wild Robot shake out in terms of the rankings for an opening weekend? It comes in at 24th. DreamWorks Animation's top 3 in terms of total domestic box office. At number 3, we have the original Shrek, which made $268 million. At number 2, we have Shrek 3 with $332.7 million. And at number 2, we have Shrek 2 at $491.4 million. Wild Robot currently sits at number 33. The top 3 DreamWorks Animation films for total worldwide, which is international and domestic box office, are at number 3, Shrek Forever After, $756.2 million. Shrek the Third, or Shrek 3, at $807.3 million. And at number 1, Shrek 2 at $935.5 million. The Wild Robot on that list comes in at number 39. So, DreamWorks Animation seems to have their number 1 character, which is Shrek. And if you've seen the Shrek movies, it's not hard to understand why. They're incredibly well done. They're hilarious. They're a lot of fun to watch. So nothing has overtaken Shrek as a character as of yet at DreamWorks Animation. In terms of the Wild Robot, let's just start diving into it. And this first watch review is going to go exactly like the most recent one, which I believe was Beetlejuice. I've done so many at this point. But we're gonna step through that 10-step process that we did the last time. At the end, we'll tally up the rankings of each of those steps, and we'll see what we get. To start with, it's important to note that The Wild Robot is originally a book, a New York Times bestseller that is absolutely beautifully illustrated by Peter Brown. In terms of the cast of this movie, diving into that specifically, we have Lupita Nyong'o as Roz, the main robot, the essentially, I guess, main protagonist of this movie. She has had an incredible year, also starring in A Quiet Place Day One. If you haven't seen that, you really need to see it. I've done a review on this channel of that particular movie. It was before I had this guy, so please excuse the audio in it, but it is a fantastic film and a brilliant entry into the Quiet Place series. And she is phenomenal. Other things she's known for, obviously, the Black Panther series, and then, of course, the Star Wars sequel trilogy. On top of that, we've got a really good cast of characters here. We have Pedro Pascal as Fink the Fox. Pedro Pascal, obviously known for things like The Last of Us, The Mandalorian, and has a movie coming out before too long that I feel like many are really anxiously awaiting, and that would be Gladiator 2. On top of that, we have Catherine O'Hara. I just got done talking about Catherine O'Hara in the Beetlejuice review. So, I mean, obviously, she's a part of the Beetlejuice franchise. She's also known for A Mighty Wind and Home Alone. Catherine O'Hara, brilliant actress. I can't say enough about Catherine O'Hara. I feel like I'm echoing exactly what I said in the Beetlejuice review. Catherine O'Hara, she just does quirky well. She does dry sense of humor well, sarcasm, just chef's kiss. Brilliant actress, and this role is no different. We also have Bill Nighy, which he's playing Longneck the Goose in this particular film. Bill Nighy, whether or not you know it, you probably know of him. He is known for the movie Shaun of the Dead. He plays Shaun's stepdad in that. We're in the fall season. If you haven't seen Shaun of the Dead, you need to stop what you're doing. You need to find a copy, and you need to watch Shaun of the Dead, or find it streaming. It's just brilliant and hilarious. He's also known for Love Actually, and of course, he's known for the Pirates franchise. So, another brilliant actor that I don't think is really, in all honesty, talked about enough. He deserves to be talked about more. So, I love seeing him in absolutely anything, and love that he was a part of this particular movie. On top of that, Talk about brilliant voice actor for this next one. This actor is known, in terms of voice acting, for maybe, if you were talking about just in general, the best Joker in Batman. I think you'd have to pick him. I think you would absolutely have to pick him. If you're including animated with live action, I think Mark Hamill is the best Joker there ever has been, probably ever will be. He's known for Joker in Batman the Animated Series from the 90s, which I could do an entire review just of that show alone. It's brilliant. It's Emmy Award winning. It's just, it's an awesome, awesome show with episodes highlighting Clayface and Mr. Freeze, the Heart of Ice episode. It paints Batman not only as the brilliant detective that he is, but also it dives into the humanity of Batman, which I feel like we really don't address a lot of the time inside of many of the live action instances, or at least we don't address it enough. The animated instances, the animated media that exists does that. And the animated series shows that with Mark Hamill as Joker. Mark Hamill has also done the Joker in numerous animated film instances. The Killing Joke, another brilliant movie. It's an R-rated entry into the animated franchise, which many may find intriguing. And he's known for doing the Joker in probably my favorite game of all time, which is the Arkham Asylum, Arkham City series. And he's brilliant as the Joker in that. Those games are absolutely fantastic. Again, maybe my favorite video game of all time. The storyline's incredible. The mechanics are incredible. I can't begin to say enough about that video game series. So, Mark Hamill plays Thorn the Bear in this movie, and per usual does an incredible job. Other things Mark Hamill's known for, obviously Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. He also lent his voice acting credentials to one of the more recent films, The Boy and the Heron. So he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant, and I adore Mark Hamill. Everything that he does. So that is those are some of the actors lending their voices to this particular movie. To tell you a little bit about essentially the premise of this movie, and I realize I probably should have even started there before diving into the characters, but the premise of this is that Roz, which is short for Rosm, and there's a unit, I think it's Unit 1737, is a robot that finds herself on, essentially wakes up or gains consciousness on a shoreline in this wilderness area surrounded by all of these woodland creatures, from otters, which I believe are the first to be introduced to Roz, to deer, raccoons, beavers, a fox, obviously played by Pedro Pascal. Just an awesome premise to a movie, and especially considering that through that, Roz inevitably comes into, whether she wants it or not, kind of parenthood over a Gosling. And I won't tell you how that happens. I don't want to ruin anything for you. I think if you've seen the trailer, you already know that's part of this premise. But she she comes into parenthood, essentially, of this Gosling. And through that process, becomes more and more connected with her surroundings, the world, in a way kind of gains consciousness of how she feels, which is something obviously a robot would not normally do. But Roz is no ordinary robot and is exceptionally intelligent in a way that I think allows her to gain some form of consciousness over who she is. So she meets this incredible cast of characters, and through that process, she discovers more about herself, who she is, who she wants to be, her story. Bright Bill, the Gosling that she's looking after, discovers who he is, who he can be, and we'll dive into this a little bit more when we get to theme. But Roz also has an incredible impact on these woodland creatures. So that's a little bit of the backstory here. That's kind of the premise of what's going on, what is happening. Obviously, Roz didn't, hatch from an egg, or she's not some animal in the wild. She got there from somewhere, right? And that plays a part in the storyline, obviously. So I don't want to give too much away on that. I don't want to give away too much of the story. I want you to be able to enjoy that. But anytime that I do talk about a premise or the storyline, I will talk about generally what you see in the trailer, that the trailer at least lets you know about the movie, so that, I'm not essentially spoiling anything or giving away anything. But that's the premise. So now we're going to move on to the crew. So, this movie is directed, and the screenplay is also written by Chris Sanders. Might be Saunders. Forgive me if I'm saying that last name wrong. But that is who directed and wrote the screenplay. He's known for The Croods, How to Train Your Dragon, and Lilo and Stitch. All good films. The producer of this movie is Jeff Herman. And forgive me if you see me, glancing away. Obviously, per usual, I have my notes that I am going down here so we can keep things organized, and you essentially don't have to watch me just sit and ramble, at least to the best of my ability. So the producer is Jeff Herman, known for Boss Baby and Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3. I don't think he is credited on the original Kung Fu Panda. Could be wrong on that, but I do know he is credited for Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3. The editor of the movie is Mary Blee, who is known for Boss Baby. The composer of this movie is Chris Bowers. Chris Bowers is known for lending his composition talents to movies like Bob Marley, One Love, which is one of the more recent films, as well as The Color Purple. He's also known for The Haunted Mansion and the Green Book. Can't even read my own handwriting. So yes, he's known for The Green Book. On top of that, the director of photography, or the cinematographer for this movie, is Chris Stover. Chris Stover is known for the film Turbo. He was not the director of photography for that. He was the head of layout for that movie. I believe this may be the first film where Chris Stover is the director of photography. That leads us to the first point in our 10 points, which is the plot. The plot for this movie is absolutely plausible. Now, you heard me talk a little bit earlier about the general premise, and I talked about how Roz impacts the village or the community in which she finds herself in. And some people, I personally am not one of these, but some people may get hung up on, the question of, well, how is she going to communicate with these animals? They solve that beautifully. Absolutely beautifully. And it makes it completely plausible that she could have conversations with these different creatures. And it's awesome the way they do it. I don't want to give that away, but just know they do address that, and they do it very, very well. Additionally, the plot for this film, just in general, is structured beautifully to allow the audience to feel every emotion involved in this. And make no mistake, this is a very big, essentially all the feels movie. It has a little bit of everything emotionally, and that essentially plays into the depth of this film, and there is tremendous depth. This movie has a lot to say, and we'll get into those specifics again when we get to theme. But the structure in general of the plot and the way that each essentially act of this film takes place is done very well. It's done very, very well. From, Roz's gaining of consciousness on the shoreline and how did that happen? How did she get there? To the Gosling becoming essentially her taking the Gosling under her wing, pun absolutely intended. How did that happen? What does that do with the story? To just the general self-awareness that these characters have. And honestly, I think, and this is going to play into, I believe, the theme section in my notes, honestly, how every character has their own miniature arc to their storyline. Every character, pretty much, has one. And that's stunning. And they managed to do that. And this comes down to structure and organization. And I talked about this with Beetlejuice. There were a lot of stories happening. And before one could even begin to be resolved or fleshed out, another one would start. And that leads to a little bit of chaos, and the audience can feel that, and it can be a very jarring experience, and honestly, it can essentially reawaken the audience to the fact that they're watching a movie instead of being a part of that movie or that story, and that's what you don't want. You want the audience from the start to be emotionally invested and just invested in general in the characters, in the storyline from start to finish. You don't want the audience feeling like they're watching actors play characters. You want them to feel like they're watching characters. You don't want the audience to feel like they're just watching a movie. You want them to feel like they are a part of that environment and they're actively engaged with said story. This movie, the difference between it and Beetlejuice is that it too told multiple kind of mini stories, and it did it flawlessly. And not once do you feel like, all right, now I'm lost. I was following this story and I was invested in that. Now you're tossing this story at me. You don't feel that with this movie. So there is something absolutely to be said for that. The one thing, and this doesn't detract points, to be honest, but the one thing that me personally, and this is because I was invested in the characters, that I wish I could have seen a little bit more of, is Fink's backstory, Fink the Fox. And you'll know what I mean when you see this movie, or if you have seen this movie, you'll probably know what I'm talking about here. There's a lot that's alluded to with Fink's past, and you fall in love with that character so much that I think you really want to know more deeply about what has happened in Fink's past and what his full story really is. So I wish we could have gotten a little bit more of that. Again, not a deal breaker, doesn't detract points away. It just would have been nice, I think, for me, because I was so invested in Fink, which, again, plays back to what I was saying. You get very emotionally invested in these characters, and not just the main ones, also the side characters. And there's something to be said for that, the brilliance of that. So, for plot, I give this an absolute 10 out of 10. It's structured beautifully, and you get absolutely invested in it. So, plot, 10 out of 10. Up next, attraction at number 2. Okay, so attraction, the attractiveness of the film itself. Is the premise attractive? Is the theme attractive? Is the film in general attractive? The premise and the theme, as I said, essentially in the plot section, pulls you in from the start, and you never, ever let go. You stay there. The film is not only packed with essentially all the feels, but it is jam-packed with action, thrills, suspense. It has a little bit of everything, but obviously at its core are the feels. And as someone who is a deep feeler, I truly appreciate that, because this film moves you. It moves you to feel something. And I always adore that. It's one of the number one things I love about movies. If a movie can move you to tears, and this one absolutely gets to that level. If it can move you to feel something, if it can cause you to examine your own life and how you live and how you interact with the world, then it has done something, and it's extremely important. This movie does that. You know, from Roz's initial intro with the animals, which you can imagine is pretty humorous, how she, at the very beginning, initially interacts with these characters. It's very funny, especially how the characters, these animals, respond to Roz. And I think that they have nailed the quirks and the movements and the way that these animals naturally react to things in the actual wild. I think they've nailed that perfectly. So it also has ups and downs of looking after the Gosling, also known as Bright Bill. All kinds of ups and downs and feels just with that main storyline thread that I won't go into specifically, again, because I think you have to see it. But again, that is an example. Those two things are examples of how humor is introduced, of how emotions are introduced, suspense is introduced. So it is absolutely attractive in that sense. It is jam-packed with feels, thrills, suspense, all those things. So it's a very attractive movie. And there's tons of action to it. So for attraction, I give this movie a 10 out of 10. And that takes us to number 3, which is theme. This is probably the one that I may spend the most amount of time on, because to me, in most movies, outside of, maybe B-list horror, and even their themes somewhat important, but for most films, theme may be one of the most important aspects. What is this movie, this film that I'm watching, trying to convey? What is its message to the world? What does it want to leave behind, essentially? And this film has a ton of them. A ton of them. Each just as touching as the last one. The main, I would say probably the main theme of this movie, and the director Chris Saunders has made this statement. The number one thing he hopes people take away from the movie is that kindness is a survival skill. And that, that's actually said at one point in the movie. And I think the way in which they accomplish expressing that causes other themes to branch out. And one of those themes, I think, is about self-awareness and self-appreciation, which is incredibly important in today's time. I think that's something so many people, at times even myself, struggle with. It's that I think it's due to for so many people, for me, a drive for perfection a lot of the time makes us feel like we're not good enough. And it's very easy to buy into that lie and to tell ourselves those things. And it's important to note we shouldn't listen to that, because it's absolutely what I just said. It's a lie. And this movie really touches on that. It's becoming aware of who we are. For instance, for me, I'm one of the biggest nerds ever, and I love that about myself. And I think it's incredibly soothing for us as human beings to become aware of who we are and to practice and constantly tell ourselves, I really love you for that. I think that's important, because when we don't, the other thing, the lie, will start to take over, that we're not enough, that we're not good enough. And the more that we tell ourselves anything, the more we start to believe it. So, for me, I'm a massive nerd. I mean, I'm wearing a Dragon Ball Z shirt, for crying out loud. I'm doing film reviews. I as much as I dive into movies, I'd probably just as equally dive into weather. I'm a huge weather nerd. And then on top of that, I love board games, which, shout out very quickly, if you love board games, there is a channel here on YouTube called Board Game Hangover. It is one of my favorite things to watch. So if you haven't checked that out, check them out. They're an absolute blast. Giannis and Giannis. I love watching these two, and they are incredible at what they do. Some of the things they've done I've used to essentially help guide me on this particular channel, just things they do with theirs and the way they organize things. So they're really good if you love board games. Also, if you love the weather, Ryan Hall, y'all, incredible. I've learned a ton from him just watching. So anyway, as I ramble off, let's bring it back to The Wild Robot. This movie talks about loving yourself, and that's important. It's important to be aware of who we are and to not judge ourselves for being nerdy or for mistakes that we make, but to understand that the things that we love and are exceptionally passionate about that essentially make us a nerd about that particular thing are the things that make us special. And that's a beautiful thing. That is an incredibly beautiful thing. It's what makes you, you. So you should love that about yourself. You should appreciate that about yourself. And you should be aware of that and constantly tell yourself that you love that about yourself. So that is a big key, I think, component to this particular movie. It is a theme of this film. Essentially, finding who you are and knowing you're enough and perfect just the way you are and the way in which you've been created. So, incredibly important theme in this film. The next theme I want to talk about is another incredibly important theme, especially for this time period that we all find ourselves in, and that is the transformative power of love and kindness toward one another, and the importance of caring for one another and meeting needs of others. This plays into the importance of selflessness over selfishness, the importance of diving in to friendships and offering grace and understanding. A friendship, a relationship, a friendship is a relationship, but any relationship is going to have bumps in the road. And it's going to be in those instances how we treat one another that really define what ends up happening with that particular relationship. Now, whether that be husband and wife, parent and child, best friends, whatever that relationship may be, how we treat each other is exceptionally important. So, and that is true even in the ugly aspects, even in the dark moments, how we treat one another. Do we respond in anger? Do we not offer grace and understanding for what someone is going through? That's incredibly impactful on that particular being, and that goes for humans and animals. So how we treat one another is incredibly important, and the impact that makes can either be beautiful or it can be a nightmare. That's an important theme. So the importance of kindness, consideration, grace, understanding, living in peace with one another, all of these things, loving one another, all of these things are things we are, whether we admit it or not, what our innermost soul, our being, longs to be and longs to receive. So longs to give, longs to receive. This movie highlights that. And it highlights it very, very, very well. I already went over my third point that's on this sheet, which is essentially the perils of having a lone wolf mentality, that selfish mentality that, some of you may have instances where you've run into this, where people can be friends as long as as long as their needs are taken care of, or as long as they don't have to deal with the messiness that is you, that person is essentially an example of that lone wolf. Let me think about what I'm trying to say here. I mean, essentially, it's a one-way street. And a relationship is not a one-way street. A relationship is a two-way street. It's caring about each other. Not, I'll care about you as long as my needs are fulfilled. As long as X, as long as Y. That's selfishness. That is a quid pro quo kind of relationship. And that is a peril. That is a danger. And so I think to some extent, this movie does highlight that. It highlights the dangers of having that kind of mentality. So that's kind of the third piece. It kind of goes with number 2. But y'all, I'm 3 points of 6 in, and this is already 3 exceptionally deep, incredible points that this movie makes. The fourth one is generally our relation to the environment, the world around us, and the impact that we all have on our planet, on the animals, on the plant life, on every living thing. Our impact. I think at times it's important to be reminded and humbled by how small we are. But I think the danger in that is that we buy into it so heavily that we think we don't have an impact. And let me just go ahead and make the statement. Each of us, you, have an impact on everyone around you and everything around you in one way or another. You matter. You have an impact. You are important. So, again, that humbling aspect of how small we are in a lot of instances, that can be a good thing. It can be good to be humble, but at the exact same time, it's also important that you understand you have an impact, whether it be for good or bad. So, this movie is incredible at showing that. I feel like I've said incredible like 1,400 times, but you know what? We're going to run with it because I think that's really kind of the word for this film. The fifth point, the power of encouragement, grace, understanding. Again, this ties into some of those other themes, but I think it's an important little branch off of that the main theme. There are instances where our characters find themselves doubting their abilities, where they feel, as I've said before, like they are not enough, that they're failing. And this movie shows the power that one individual, by individual I mean animal, robot, human, the power that one individual can have on another through encouragement, encouraging someone to just keep going, that you are enough, that you have an unbelievable ability to accomplish anything you set out to do. There's power in that. The second piece, grace, to meet people where they are. Grace and understanding, kind of buddies in a way. They kind of have a relationship together. Meeting someone where they are, accepting the messiness, understanding how someone feels, understanding what causes them to be anxious in certain instances, and then through that understanding and offering that grace to allow someone to be who they are but still be loved immensely. Through that, paired with the encouragement to keep going, you've got this. There's exceptional power in that. So this movie highlights that too. And I feel like kind of a little bit of a broken record, but I want, even if you don't see this movie, but you do watch this review, at the very least, I think for me, being the big feeler that I am, I want you to take away, you are enough. You are great, just the way that you are. And you can accomplish anything that you put your mind to. That's important. So, and you are appreciated. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I appreciate your love of movies. If you're watching this, you probably have that. So I appreciate you for who you are. So, at the very least, if you don't see this movie, take that away from this review. So, finally, I think the other big component of this that the director mentions in an interview, and that is adoption. What it means to be a parent. Because in this movie, Roz, essentially, whether she wants it or not, has to take on that role. And I think it highlights that to be a parent, it doesn't have to just be your biological child. The importance of being an adopted or an adoptive parent to a child. The importance of being not just a parent to a child. I, for one, I'm a pet parent, and I'm sure many of you are. The importance of that role. Because it's really amazing when you think about the relationship that you build with even an animal. Because dogs, cats, whatever your tarantula, whatever your pet may be, they become a part of the family. Your heart attaches. And the impact that the two of you have on one another is an exceptional thing. It's an awesome thing. It defies, in many instances, I think, understanding. So, I think this movie really highlights that very well. You have, on the one hand, Roz, who, by all accounts, shouldn't have the ability to feel. They address that, by the way. Shouldn't have the ability to feel. She's a robot. But she does. And on the other hand, so she's not human. On the other hand, you have a creature, a gosling, that certainly knows this being that I've attached myself to doesn't look like me, and likely is not my real mother. But the trust that's built, still, the care, the love, all of that, it highlights it. And it highlights it very, very well. So I told you I was going to spend a lot of time on theme, and I have spent a lot of time on theme because there are an unbelievable number of incredible themes inside of this movie. Tons of them. It's filled with them. So this absolutely, of all the points, it 1,000% gets a 10 out of 10. And in my eyes, I don't even know if that's even debatable for this particular point. It gets a 10 out of 10. It is incredible in that instance. So for number 3, theme, it's a 10 out of 10. And that moves us to number 4, which is acting. Each of the characters in this movie are very relatable in their own ways. I think that an audience member will find a character they latch onto that they can relate to in some way. And that adds depth to the acting. And in this instance, I think what we're really speaking about isn't just the actor, but the writing of these characters, the writing of the dialogue, which we're going to dive into as well shortly. But this goes back to what I said earlier, each character essentially has their own mini arc to their character development, which is stunning and kind of a master class on how you can even make that possible in the span of a movie. Because again, talking about Beetlejuice, we had so much going on that it essentially led to, I believe, what I termed in that review as whiplash. You were jarred from the story to the point of you're just watching a movie, which is what you don't want. This movie, on the other hand, doesn't have that. Every story has their arc, or every character has their arc, and they don't get in the way of each other. That's beautiful. So, you have Roz essentially finding herself through her love of others, through care, through kindness, in this strange land that she's found herself in. Hence the point behind the director saying that kindness is a survival skill. You have Bright Bill, who is essentially discovering his abilities and that he's capable of so much more than he thought. You have Fink, the fox, becoming, and I don't think that this just applies to Fink. I think it applies to other characters as well, but becoming, and this speaks to an understanding of essentially the material, and by that I mean an understanding of animals in the wild, becoming less and less selfish. Now, selfishness can kind of also be its own survival skill. This whole survival of the fittest mentality that, the old joke that's been said, people are being chased by a bear. I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you, which is a very selfish statement. But naturally, that is built in to survive, to look out for oneself. But you have these characters, these animals, becoming less and less selfish and more selfless. And Fink is a perfect example of that. And you start to see Fink blossom and develop leadership abilities. And it's heartwarming and beautiful to watch happen. you lose yourself in these characters. And that speaks, again, it's not just the writing, it speaks to the acting. Pedro Pascal does an incredible job of illustrating Fink, speaking to Fink's own anxieties, worries, past, whatever it may be. Catherine O'Hara as the possum, the way that they've done that is brilliant. But Catherine O'Hara, that her character goes from someone that can't be bothered to someone that bothers to care. So the acting's incredible. It's very well done. The acting gets a 10 out of 10. You're probably starting to spot a little bit of a theme to this review here on the different points. Up next, we have dialogue. The dialogue in this accomplishes everything that it needs to accomplish. It furthers the story along. It keeps it moving. It doesn't get stagnant. You don't feel like you're going to fall asleep at any point. It reveals the inner workings of characters really, really well. They're written exceptionally well. I talked about that. The context of everything that's happening through the dialogue is absolutely plausible. I talked about the fact that they have a way of explaining how Roz can even begin to communicate with these characters. That shows a well thought out story, but it also shows well thought out dialogue between these characters, these beings that would not normally be communicating with one another. So very well done on that. And the dialogue reflects characters and applies to each animal in their own special way. Now, I talked about Catherine O'Hara and the possums. I think the raccoon characters are really, really well done. The dialogue, the way they act. I watched kind of some behind the scenes footage a while back relating to The Lion King and it's not just Lion King, I think they also did this with Bambi, but how Disney animators, they would bring animals in and they would study the movements, how they would react to certain situations. I mean, down to every last muscle movement. From face to legs, all of it. Quirky things that they would do, the way they'd play, the way that they would attack, or whatever it might be. I think the animators of this film did the same thing. They took the time to dive deep and think through, how's a raccoon going to react in this situation versus how's a beaver going to react in this situation versus how would a possum respond to this? And it's so good. It's so good, and it adds to the storyline. It adds to the dialogue. It adds to the characters themselves, and it adds to the humor, to be honest, in a lot of instances for this movie. So dialogue gets a 10 out of 10. That brings us to the next point, and that is cinematography / animation is what I'm going to say. Cinematography / animation. Because yes, you're still dealing with the way essentially the camera is moving. In a lot of ways, you're still dealing with lighting and that kind of stuff. But in the sense of animation. So it's a little different. It's a little different than a live action movie, for instance. But it's still there. It is, in all honesty, tough for me to think back on a movie that is more beautiful than this movie. I honestly, I'm telling you right now, I don't know that I can think of a movie that visually is more stunning to me than this movie. There's some that, I don't know, maybe there might be some that are tied with it. You know, Finding Nemo, gorgeous film. 101 Dalmatians, I've got that on this list right here. Some of you may be going, 101 Dalmatians, you know, what was beautiful about that movie? I think it's essentially the animation style. You know, it's going back. Go back and look at the animation style of 101 Dalmatians. They almost left the extra little pencil stencil markings inside the animation. And it's gorgeous. It's like watching drawing come to life. And it's very beautifully done. So 101 Dalmatians absolutely would be up there, at least for me, my personal taste, my personal style. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Whew. Talk about a deep movie / book. If you haven't seen that, you absolutely need to. It's a short film. It's not long. Take the time to watch it, though, because it has a lot to offer. Again, going back to the theme we already talked about, it just in its own way, it offers a lot theme-wise. But it also, the beauty of it is, it's stunning. It is a stunning film visually. So I think those would potentially rival this. The style of this movie, and you probably saw in the trailer at the beginning, and you're probably wondering, what is this style? This is intriguing. I haven't seen this either in a minute or I haven't seen this before. The style of this movie, the director really wanted and has stated that he always wanted to do a movie that was like a painting come to life. So what you're witnessing is really a painting telling a story. And I really think that it becomes even more beautiful when you think of the subject matter. You know, with the environment, animals, just creation as a whole, there's an art to it. And what could really highlight art, you know, as well as painting. So it's very stunning. And that's the style. That's the style that Chris Sanders was going for, was that painting look. He said that he wanted to essentially lean away from the traditional CG. One reason for that is because he didn't want this movie to come off as, well, this is just a film for kids. And I'll take my kid to see it, but it's really not meant for me. So, you know, I'll let them enjoy the movie and I'll pull my phone out, which hopefully you don't ever do that in a theater. But, you know, he didn't want it to become that, because this offers much more depth for adults. So don't let it fool you. It also allows that style of animation. It allows for more emotion to be expressed. And I agree with him on that. I think that this film really does a good job through the animation, through that style of showing emotion, showing feelings. You know, there's a particular instance, and I believe that you saw it in the trailer, at the beginning of this where the Gosling, Bright Bill, takes his head, puts it up against Roz's, which any of you out there that are pet parents like myself, you've probably come into contact with this yourself. And I've never seen a film put imagery to the feeling, but whether it be your dog looking you in the eyes and just giving you like a slow kiss, or a cat, your cat that you have, taking its head and putting it down and rubbing it either under your chin as you're cradling it or across your face. That reflection of love. The way they show this in this movie or at least one prime example of it, because I don't want to give away any other examples, but one prime example of it is when Bright Bill takes his head as a Gosling and puts it up against Roz's, closes his eyes. You see, and it's through color, you see Roz, who naturally has this kind of blue look, this blue lighting to her inner mechanics, essentially. You see it turn almost like a pink or a pinkish red / orange. And it's love. And so it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. So cinematography, animation, you guessed it, it gets a 10 out of 10. That leads us to editing. Editing is important because it is utilized to convey tone a lot of the time in films. And the tone that is conveyed in this movie is conveyed unbelievably well. And I just highlighted one of those, such as Roz's colors changing based on when she's thinking logically like a robot versus when she's thinking from her heart or making decisions from her heart. Just the forethought of that and the editing involved in that is just, yet again, chef's kiss. The movie had a great deal of action. I've talked about that. The important thing about that, though, and this speaks to the editing, the action was not suffocating the film. It wasn't taking over, essentially. It didn't feel like a constant roller coaster. Now, don't get me wrong, there were moments that had a lot of energy, a lot of action, a lot of suspense. That's there, absolutely. But there's also moments where they slow down, and it's always when it's needed. It's always when something is coming across, or they're trying to get something across, and highlight the importance of a moment. That is editing. Editing has a huge part of showcasing that. And then, of course, the effects are believable, and visually they are stunning. So, very well done there. Editing, 10 out of 10. Now we get to soundtrack. On soundtrack, I spoke to Chris Bowers. Forgive me, I got a lot of names running around through my head, but I spoke about Chris Bowers and the other movies that he has done, Color Purple being one of those, which had an exceptional soundtrack. Another great movie. The Green Book. I spoke to some other movies that he has done music for. There is the music in this particular movie is so gorgeous, and it fits every scene where it's involved. part of, and I'll be interested to see how much they talk about this, and I'm sure they talk a lot about it because the trailer for this particular documentary seems to insinuate that they will. The new John Williams documentary that's coming out on Disney Plus. By the way, if you haven't seen that trailer, go check that out. This documentary is going to be exceptional. Talking about the impact his music, his compositions have made to film, and just how music in general impacts movies. You know, perfect example I can think of is that moment in Jurassic Park. At least for him, that moment in Jurassic Park when they first come in contact with the dinosaurs. And you have, you know, the doctor taking his glasses off and having to you know, essentially showing that he's blown away. I think that the music in that scene is what really drives the emotion of it and the beauty and the wonder of what they're seeing. I think the music does that. That's the importance of soundtracks. That's the importance of composers. That's the importance of music in film. And I think that Chris Bowers nails it on this movie. There are numerous instances where I probably would have felt a little bit the way that I was feeling in certain scenes if it had just been the scene. But that music takes it to another level. It's the difference between essentially knowing the emotion that they're trying to convey and feeling the emotion that they're trying to convey. It's the difference between knowing, oh, this is a sad moment, and having the actual tears in your eyes or your hair stand up. Music is that difference. And Chris Bowers nails it. Nails it in this movie. Soundtrack, composer, 10 out of 10. That brings us to director. I've already talked a lot about Chris Saunders. I'm going to say his name both ways, just so I got, you know, I cover both sides of that. So forgive me, Chris, if you see this. You know, should have looked that up ahead of time. But I'm going to state this the same way I stated it for Beetlejuice. The director is essentially like the president of the movie. The buck stops with them. And all of these pieces, cinematography, editing, animation, acting, writing, all of these, lighting, all of these pieces only come together and function the way that they're meant to function and get the vision across that they're supposed to get across due to the director keeping everything in check, keeping thought, all those things organized. Everything to this point has gotten a 10 out of 10. This is no different. This is no different. Chris gets an absolute 10 out of 10 for his directing on this. It is unbelievably done. And I'm going to go ahead and lead us into the final point to go over, which is it factor. And it factor, I think that director ties into this. It factor talks about, did this offer something unique? Was there something groundbreaking about this movie? Or is there just something about it I can't put my finger on, but I love? You know, I can't tell you why. I just know there's something there. There's something special, an X factor, an it factor. This has it. I've already talked about one of the things that does that. It's the animation style. That animation style I have not seen in a very long time. And to be honest with you, I don't really know a time I've seen the painting almost style of animation. But in terms of the appreciation for the analog, as director Chris Saunders puts it, the analog style of it, the going back to the non-CG animation style, the appreciation of that is shown. You absolutely can see it. And as somebody that extremely appreciates when movies don't rely completely on computer graphics, especially animated films, but that also rely on actual animators and their hands and what they're drawing, what they're painting. To me, some of the best animated films of all time are partially because of the fact that computers didn't get in the way of it. That how the animator felt about that character, and this is not me saying we should not have computers, saying that artificial intelligence should not be involved, at least somewhat, in the creative process. Because I, for one, my personal feelings on AI is that it's not coming to take over anybody's jobs. I think it could, if it was allowed to, but I think it's there to make people more efficient. And I think the way that we've been addressing the whole AI situation really is kind of reminiscent to when computers came along during the age of hand-drawn animation. We can either be reluctant to that and not use that tool, and then, yes, we will become obsolete, or we can find a way to utilize said tool to make our lives more efficient, to make things easier, and really become even more advanced and better at what we're doing, thereby eliminating any instance for a reason to be eliminated. So I think that's kind of what we're dealing with, in my opinion, personally. And that's just my personal opinion. But I think that's what we're dealing with. I do absolutely think there is a place for a discussion to be had around the dangers of AI, because like anything else, if left unchecked, something that is created can be used for evil. We split the atom. We could create nuclear power that could help in many instances, or we could create a nuclear bomb that does nothing but destroy. So a lot of things can be used for good, and they can be used for evil. There's two sides. So I think all of that being said, and I got a little bit off the trail here, which I can do, but all of that being said, I really appreciate it when a movie, an animated film, goes back to, and I really, 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 really hope that Disney gets back to this. Please, if somebody at Disney is watching this, if you take anything away, please take this away. Get back to focusing in on the OG animation style. Now, I'm not saying don't use computers. I'm not saying don't use technology to enhance, but get back to what made you glorious to begin with. Back to basics, essentially. Because I promise you, you will not be let down by that. Just test it out. Do one film with it. If anything, to appease me. Anyway, I love it when animated films do that, and this movie does that. I already spoke to 101 Dalmatians. That's a prime example of hand-drawn animation at its finest. I think you also see that in Aristocats. Those two movies, it's really interesting. One's about dogs, the other's about cats. Both have that feel to them. Another movie, Sword in the Stone, is a good example, I think, of that style. Maybe Jungle Book, too. That style is beautiful. It's gorgeous. And I think this movie really gets back to that. And so I think that gives it in a way, an it factor. That it factor is in an age where everything is CG, I'm going to buck that trend and I'm going to go back to hand animated or painted in the design aspect of this, in the visual aspect of this. And that to me, because it's been so long since we've really seen that, speaks volumes and gives it an it factor because it's been so long. So, again, I can't speak enough to animation and the story of importance of kindness. That story could not come at a better time. I think that also gives it a little bit of an it factor during a time where we're all feeling anxious about the state of the world, the way things are going. This movie is like a warm blanket, and it really is trying to leave behind an important message and theme of kindness can be a survival skill, and it can have massive implications on the state of the world, the state of the planet, and how we interact with one another. So, it factor, it's a 10 out of 10. So that brings us to the end here, where we are going to add up each of the individual points, and we will average those together and get the ultimate, essentially, first watch review / rating of this movie. Before I do that, I do want to talk about what this is seeing online. Internet Movie Database, IMDb, is giving this movie an 8.5. Rotten Tomatoes is giving it a 98%, which I also believe is certified fresh. Could be wrong, but I think it is. And the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think they're doing a new thing called Popcorn Meter, which kind of has a new process as well. And they have different terms for it, just like they do, certified fresh, So for the popcorn meter, they have hot or stale. The audience meter or popcorn meter is 98%. It's the exact same as the Rotten Tomatoes score. It is hot. And it absolutely deserves that. I am right in line with that. As we go back through, let's talk about it. Plot. I gave this a 10 out of 10. Attraction. A 10 out of 10. Theme. A 10 out of 10. Acting. A 10 out of 10. Dialogue. A 10 out of 10. Cinematography. A 10 out of 10. Editing, a 10 out of 10. Soundtrack, a 10 out of 10. Directing, a 10 out of 10. It factor, a 10 out of 10. Now, I don't think anybody has to be a statistical genius, mathematics major, to know what the average of this is going to be. You add all 10 of those together, they're all 10 out of 10s. You get 100, you divide that by 10, you get a 10. This movie is a 10. It absolutely is. It's one of, to me, the best films of the year. If you have not seen this and it is still in theaters, run, do not walk to the theater and see it. That is absolutely the way this is intended to be seen. The sound is exceptional. Again, one of the things I don't even think I talked about with sound is that you don't have the sound essentially eclipsing the dialogue in the movie, which sometimes you can have happen, and that's due to bad sound editing. So the sound is exceptional inside the theater. Obviously, the visuals are going to be exceptional in a theater on a giant screen I can't think of a better way to see this magnificently painted film. So that is exactly the way you should see it. If it is still in theaters, please get a ticket and go. You, your kids, you will all love it. The wonderful thing about a family film, I think, is always the fact that it will essentially spawn a dialogue after the movie that you can have with your kids, asking them, what did you take away? What did you love about that movie? And seeing what their takeaways were. It offers a beautiful connection you can have with your kids, and also have conversations about very important topics and themes. So, go see it if you have not. If it's no longer in theaters and you're watching this, I'm pleading with you to find a physical copy. Continue to invest in physical media. Now, here's the deal. I completely understand if you want to stream it first, see if you like it enough to spend the money to get a physical copy of it, but I'm pleading with you that if you really do love this film, and you love it as much as me, that you invest in a physical copy of this movie. The thing about physical copies, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, they don't need time to buffer. They're not going to sit there and get grainy all of a sudden. They're going to maintain their picture quality. They're going to maintain their sound quality. And on top of that, when you have a physical copy of something, it is yours. There is no chance down the line due to, iTunes losing a contract with Universal or something like that happening, where the thing that you own ends up getting taken from you. That cannot happen with a physical copy of your media. It can happen the other way. It's also just another way to show how much you appreciate the artists that took their time, put all of their effort into this beautiful creation, this beautiful film that you enjoy. And that goes beyond, obviously, just The Wild Robot. That goes for any movie that you love. I don't care if it's Army of Darkness. At whatever movie it is that you love, which, by the way, I also love Army of Darkness, but it's absolutely a B-list horror film. So I guess I also could have said, I don't care if it's Jaws the Revenge. Whatever movie it is that you love, invest in it. Get a physical copy of it. Show your appreciation to the artist by doing that. It's incredibly important. It's what helps keep this art form going. It's a way to honor the actors and actresses you love. It's a way to honor the directors you love, producers, cinematographers, composers, all of them, cast and crew. It is a way to do that. So I will absolutely be investing in a good copy of this movie as soon as it comes out, because I think it's just gorgeous and the theme is more important than ever. So from me, at the very least, to the director, Chris Saunders, Chris Bowers, the composer, Mary Blee, the editor, Jeff Herman, the producer, Chris Stover, the director of photography, and the exceptional cast and crew, which we've gone over. From me, please accept an absolute thank you for this masterpiece. It is incredibly well done, and I truly, truly appreciate you sharing it with the world. So, with that, we've been talking about The Wild Robot. It gets a 10 out of 10. Tell me what you think about it. Leave comments down below. Let me know your thoughts. The beauty of reviews and the beauty of film is that there is no definitive opinion on these things. There is none. You may have seen it more as a 9 or an 8. You may have seen it as a 4 or a 5. I don't know. But please feel free, leave your reviews below. Let me know your thoughts. And, be sure to subscribe to this channel. That's how I know you're enjoying this content. It's how I know to continue doing it. I think, personally, I'm going to continue doing it just because I love talking about these things. I love going through these reviews because through that, I kind of discover some new things I didn't think about before. And it gives me time to process everything. So, but please subscribe to the channel and leave comments below because I promise you, genuinely, I want to know your thoughts about this movie. And in the future, or in the past, with other reviews that I've done, your thoughts about those. So, with that being said, this has been yet another First Watch review. I hope you've enjoyed it. You've been listening to The Wild Robot, and it gets a 10 out of 10.